Cedric Darden, 19 years old, drove his late grandmother's sedan down a 2-lane highway through Barton County, Mississippi, on a humid summer evening. Blue and red lights flashed behind him. 2 white officers approached. Brett Lockhart leaned into the window, sniffed the air theatrically, and claimed he smelled marijuana. He ordered Cedric out. Cedric's hands trembled on the steering wheel, but beneath his shirt collar, a button camera no bigger than a pencil eraser blinked green. 600 miles away in Washington, 3 federal agents leaned toward their monitors. Everything was being watched. 2 months before that traffic stop on a Saturday afternoon in April, a young man named Jerome Gaines drove north along that same stretch of cracked Mississippi blacktop with the windows down and the radio playing low. Jerome was 24, broad across the shoulders, quiet by nature, and that day he had a reason to feel good about himself for the first time in a long time. He had just sold his used pickup truck to a mechanic in Yazoo City for $800 cash. The bill sat folded in the front pocket of his jeans. He was thinking about what he would do with the money, maybe put half toward his mother's electric bill, and save the rest when he noticed the blue and red lights blooming in his rearview mirror. Jerome pulled to the shoulder. He put the car in park. He placed both hands on top of the steering wheel exactly the way his uncle had taught him when he was 15 years old, because in Barton County, a black man kept his hands where they could be seen. Senior Patrol Officer Brett Lockhart appeared at the driver's side window. His partner, Dale Osborne, walked along the passenger side with one hand resting on his belt. Lockhart told Jerome he had a broken tail light. Jerome knew that was not true. He had replaced both taillights himself 3 weeks earlier, but he said nothing. He handed over his license and registration. Lockhart studied the documents, slowly turning the license over, as though it might reveal something hidden. Then he asked Jerome to step out of the vehicle. Jerome complied. Lockhart told Osborne to search the car. There was no consent requested. There was no warrant. Osborne opened the driver's door and began rifling through the console, the glove compartment under the seats. Lockhart patted Jerome down. His hands moved roughly through Jerome's pockets and found the fold of cash. $800. Lockhart counted it right there on the shoulder of the highway, licking his thumb between bills. He told Jerome the money was being seized under civil asset forfeiture because it was suspected drug proceeds. Jerome told him it was from a truck sale. Lockhart asked for a receipt. Jerome did not have one. The mechanic had paid in cash, and they had shaken hands. That was how things were done. Lockhart smiled. He folded the money into his own shirt pocket. Jerome's voice cracked when he spoke. He said that was every dollar he had. He said he needed it. Lockhart's expression changed. The smile disappeared. He grabbed Jerome by the collar, spun him around, and slammed him face first against the hood of the patrol car. Jerome's eyebrow split against the metal. Blood ran into his eye. Osborne stood 6 feet away, arms crossed, watching, and said nothing. Not one word. Lockhart held Jerome down for a full 30 seconds, pressing his forearm into the back of Jerome's neck before letting him up. Jerome was released with no charges. No arrest report was filed. No citation was issued. The taillights were never photographed because they were not broken. Jerome drove home with blood drying on his face and an empty pocket where $800 used to be. The following Monday, Jerome went to the Barton County Police Department and filed a formal complaint. He described the stop. He described the seizure. He described the assault. He named both officers. He signed the form and was told someone would follow up within 30 days. 48 hours later, Police Chief Howard Kingsley personally reviewed the complaint and stamped it dismissed. The official finding stated that Officers Lockhart and Osborne had followed proper procedure and that the complainant's account was inconsistent with departmental records. Jerome received a copy of the dismissal in the mail. There were no departmental records. There was nothing to be inconsistent with because nothing had been recorded. That Sunday, Jerome's mother told the story at Mount Olive Baptist Church. She stood in the fellowship hall after service with her voice shaking and her son's stitched eyebrow still swollen purple, and she told every person who would listen what had happened on that highway. A woman in the congregation, a retired schoolteacher named Gladys, listened carefully. Gladys had a phone number written in the back of her Bible. She had been carrying it for 2 years, waiting for the right moment. The number belonged to Theodore Langford, a civil rights attorney based in Jackson, who had been quietly tracking a pattern of suspicious traffic stops in Barton County, targeting black drivers. Gladys called Langford that evening. Langford drove to Barton County the following day and sat with Jerome at his mother's kitchen table. Langford was 61 years old, lean and deliberate with reading glasses that he never wore on his face, but always held in his left hand while he talked. He did not seem surprised by Jerome's story. He opened a leather binder and showed Jerome a stack of printed documents. 47 complaints. 47 black residents of Barton County who had been stopped, searched, robbed, threatened, or assaulted during traffic stops over the past 3 years. Every single complaint had been dismissed by Chief Kingsley. Not one had resulted in discipline. Not one had been forwarded to an outside agency. Langford had compiled them all. He contacted the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. A special agent named Raymond Kearney was assigned. Kearney spent weeks reviewing the records, cross-referencing traffic stop data, analyzing forfeiture filings, and mapping the geographic pattern of stops. His conclusion was clear. There was more than enough basis for a federal investigation. But paperwork and interviews would not be enough. He needed live evidence. He needed someone willing to be stopped while wearing a hidden camera. Kearney approached Cedric through Langford. Cedric Darden was Jerome Gaines's younger cousin. He was 19 years old, a sophomore at Tougaloo College studying pre-law, and he drove through Barton County twice a week, commuting between campus and his mother Lorraine's house. He fit the exact profile the officers targeted young black male, driving an older vehicle with out-of-county plates. Cedric agreed without hesitation. He did not need convincing. His grandmother Lorraine's mother had died the previous year. She had spent decades living under the weight of Barton County's system, paying fees she could not explain, avoiding roads she had every right to drive on, swallowing humiliations that accumulated in her body like stones until her heart could not carry them anymore. Cedric wore the button camera willingly. He pinned it to his shirt collar the way Kearney showed him a disc no larger than a pencil eraser, nearly invisible against the dark fabric. He understood the risk. What he did not understand, what Kearney deliberately chose not to tell him, was the scope. Because the camera was not just recording, it was streaming live to a DOJ surveillance room in Washington, where a team led by Supervising Agent Patricia Hewitt had been building this case for 18 months. And the target was not Brett Lockhart. It was not Dale Osborne. They were foot soldiers. The DOJ suspected that Chief Howard Kingsley was running a systematic extortion operation out of the Barton County Police Department itself, an operation with roots in decades of unchecked power. Cedric thought he was documenting a traffic stop. He was actually walking into the center of an organized criminal network. And the people who sent him in knew it. The evening air was thick and still when Lockhart ordered Cedric out of the sedan. Crickets screamed from the ditch grass on both sides of the highway. The blue and red lights from the patrol car pulsed in slow rhythm against the trees, painting everything in alternating color. Cedric opened his door slowly, keeping both hands visible, the way his cousin Jerome had told him to, the way every black boy in Barton County was taught, before he was old enough to understand why. Lockhart stood close. Too close. His chest was inches from Cedric's face. He was 6'3", 230 pounds, with a sunburned neck and a jaw that moved constantly, as though he were chewing something he could not taste. He told Cedric to put his hands on the hood. Cedric obeyed. The metal was warm from the engine. Lockhart kicked Cedric's feet apart with the toe of his boot, spreading his stance until his balance was off, until he had to press his palms harder into the hood just to keep from tipping forward. It was a technique designed to make a person feel helpless, and it worked. Osborne moved to the passenger side of the sedan and opened the door without asking. He did not request permission to search. He did not mention probable cause. He simply entered the vehicle the way a person enters their own home, casually with ownership. Lockhart leaned down so his mouth was level with Cedric's ear. He called Cedric, boy. Not young man, not sir, boy. He asked where Cedric was coming from. Cedric told him he was driving back from campus. Lockhart asked where he was going. Cedric said home to his mother's house 2 miles ahead. Lockhart nodded slowly as though weighing whether to believe something that required no belief at all. Then he asked the question that every black driver in Barton County had heard at least once. You got anything in that car you shouldn't have? Cedric said no. His voice was steady, but his heartbeat was hammering so hard he could feel it in his fingertips against the hood. Every question Lockhart asked was loaded with racial contempt. Not in the volume of his voice, which remained low and conversational, but in the deliberate informality of it, the way he spoke to Cedric, as though he were addressing something less than an adult, less than a citizen, less than a person who had rights that applied in this place. Osborne emerged from the sedan, holding something. Cedric turned his head slightly and saw it. A small plastic bag roughly the size of a playing card containing a green substance. Cedric had never seen that bag before in his life. It had not been in his car when he left campus 40 minutes ago. It had not been in his car when he stopped for gas 12 miles back. It had been placed there by a hand that knew exactly where to put it and how quickly to find it again. Planted evidence. Lockhart straightened up. His posture changed. He was no longer fishing. He was closing. He held the bag in front of Cedric's face and told him this was felony possession. He told Cedric he was looking at 5 to 10 years. He told Cedric his life was over. He let those words sit in the humid air for a long moment, let the weight of them press down on a 19-year-old standing on the side of a road with his palms flat on a car hood and no witness for miles. Then Lockhart's voice softened. He said there was a way to handle this without paperwork. He said $2,000 would make this disappear. Right here. Right now. The extortion was open. It was practiced. There was no hesitation in Lockhart's delivery, no moment of uncertainty. He had done this before, many times. Cedric, following instructions from Kearney, played along. He told Lockhart he did not have that kind of money. He said he was a college student. He offered what he had. Lockhart reached into Cedric's back pocket and pulled out his wallet. He opened it, removed $214 in mixed bills, counted them under the pulsing lights, and slid them into his own shirt pocket. Then he threw the empty wallet onto the gravel shoulder. It landed face down in the dirt. Lockhart told Cedric that was not nearly enough, that $200 was an insult, that Cedric was going to have to do better than that. In Washington, 600 miles northeast, DOJ agents Patricia Hewitt and her team watched everything. The stream from Cedric's button camera was clear. The audio captured Lockhart's voice, the rustle of the wallet, the sound of gravel under boots. The video showed the planted evidence, the racial language, the extortion demand. Hewitt's team had recorded felony civil rights violations, evidence tampering, and extortion in under 12 minutes. This alone would be enough for federal charges. Hewitt turned to Kearney, who was monitoring from a separate terminal. She told him to let it play out. They had what they needed for Lockhart. But this was bigger than one officer on a highway. They needed the system. Osborne, who had been silent through the entire encounter, walked back to the sedan and opened the glove compartment. He pulled out a white business envelope. Inside was a bank deposit receipt from First Southern Bank, dated 9 days earlier, showing that $15,000 had been deposited into a savings account under the name Lorraine Darden, Cedric's mother. The money was from Cedric's grandmother's life insurance payout. It was the only significant sum of money the Darden family had ever possessed. Osborne handed the receipt to Lockhart. Lockhart read it under the flashlight mounted on his vest. His entire demeanor changed. His jaw stopped moving. His eyes sharpened. The receipt was a map to real money, and Lockhart could read it. $214 had been an appetizer. Lockhart turned back to Cedric. His voice was different now. Businesslike. He told Cedric to call his mother. He told Cedric that Lorraine needed to bring $5,000 to this exact spot within 1 hour. If she did not, Cedric would be booked on possession with intent to distribute. Not simple's possession. Intent to distribute. A charge that carried 15 to 30 years in Mississippi. Cedric's mouth went dry. In Washington, Hewitt's team exchanged glances. This stop had spiraled beyond its planned scope. The stakes had just multiplied 25 times over, and the operation that was supposed to document a routine shakedown had become something far more dangerous for the 19-year-old boy, standing on the side of the road with gravel dust on his empty wallet and a camera blinking green against his collarbone. In the DOJ surveillance room in Washington, Raymond Kearney pushed back from his monitor and stood up. His chair rolled into the desk behind him. He pressed both palms flat against the table and looked at Patricia Hewitt with an expression that did not require words. This was supposed to be controlled. This was supposed to be a documented stop recorded and cataloged a single piece of evidence in a carefully constructed federal case. Cedric was supposed to be stopped, questioned, and released. The button camera would capture the racial profiling, the illegal search, the language. Clean evidence, contained risk. Nobody was supposed to be extorted for $5,000. Nobody was supposed to call their mother. Nobody was supposed to be standing on a gravel shoulder with a felony threat hanging over their head like a guillotine. Kearney told Hewitt they needed to extract Cedric. Pull him out. Send a vehicle. End the stop before it went further. Hewitt sat very still. She was a woman who had spent 23 years in federal law enforcement and had learned that the moments when things went sideways were often the moments when the truth revealed itself most clearly. She told Kearney to wait. She said they had a rare opportunity. These officers were about to show how the extortion system actually functioned, not in theory, not in interviews, not in complaint forms that had been gathering dust in Langford's leather binder. In real time on camera with audio. She told Kearney that $200 was street-level corruption. $5,000 was infrastructure. And infrastructure meant Kingsley. Kearney disagreed. He said Cedric was a civilian, a teenager. He was not trained for this. Hewitt acknowledged the risk. But she did not change her decision. She ordered the team to continue monitoring and to prepare a rapid extraction plan as a contingency. Then she turned back to her screen. On the highway, Cedric pulled out his phone and dialed his mother's number. The phone rang 3 times. Lorraine Darden answered the way she always answered calls from her son, with warmth, with a rising note of happiness in her voice, as though hearing from Cedric in the evening was a small gift the day had saved for last. She asked him if he was almost home. She told him she had made his favorite. And then she heard the strain in his breathing. She heard the way his words came out in short bursts, fractured by the effort of keeping his voice steady in front of 2 men who were watching his every expression. The warmth in Lorraine's voice collapsed. She asked him what was wrong. Cedric began to explain, but Lockhart stepped forward and took the phone from his hand. Lockhart held it to his own ear. He introduced himself by his badge number, not his name. He told Lorraine that her son had been caught with a controlled substance during a routine traffic stop. He told her the amount was consistent with distribution charges. He told her Cedric was facing serious time. Then his voice shifted into the register of someone offering a solution to a problem he had invented. He told Lorraine that these things could sometimes be handled locally without involving the courts. He said $5,000 tonight in cash would resolve the matter. But if she could not deliver it, he would transport Cedric to the county jail for processing, and once the paperwork entered the system, there would be nothing anyone could do. He said the word Parchman, Mississippi State Penitentiary. He let the name hang. Lorraine's breathing broke apart on the other end of the line. The sound that came through the phone was not screaming, and it was not sobbing. It was the low, shattered moan of a woman whose worst fear was being confirmed in the flattest possible language by a stranger's voice. She said she could get $3,000. She said she would need time. She said, please. Lockhart told her $3,000 would do for now, and gave her directions to the spot on the highway where Cedric's car was parked. Then he hung up and handed the phone back to Cedric without looking at him. While Lorraine scrambled to gather cash, borrowing from a neighbor 2 doors down, and pulling crumpled 20s from the envelope she kept under the kitchen sink for emergencies, Lockhart stepped away from Cedric and made his own phone call. He dialed a number he clearly had memorized. The DOJ agents heard every word through the button camera. Lockhart's voice lowered, but did not whisper. He was speaking to someone he respected, someone he reported to. He said he had a live one. He mentioned the $15,000 deposit receipt. He described Cedric's age, his vehicle, his college enrollment. He was providing a briefing. The voice on the other end was calm, measured, unhurried. It belonged to Chief Howard Kingsley, and the instructions Kingsley gave were not the instructions of a supervisor managing an incident. They were the instructions of an operator running a system. Kingsley told Lockhart not to process Cedric at the roadside. He said to bring him to the station. Not to booking. To the back room. Those 3 words sent a ripple through the DOJ surveillance room. Hewitt leaned forward. Kearney closed his eyes. The reference confirmed what their investigation had suspected for 18 months, but had never been able to prove. The Barton County Police Station had a dedicated space off the books, off the cameras, off the record, where black residents were taken and squeezed. This was not 2 rogue officers supplementing their income with shakedowns on a rural highway. This was institutional. It had infrastructure. It had a room. Kearney stood again and faced Hewitt. He told her that Cedric could not be taken to that station. Hewitt told him that Cedric had to be taken to that station. Because the room was the case. The room was the evidence that would prove this was not isolated misconduct, but organized systematic corruption operating under the protection of a police chief. Without the room, they had 2 dirty cops. With the room, they had a federal RICO case. Kearney's jaw tightened. He looked at the monitor. Cedric's face filled the screen reflected in the patrol car's side mirror. His eyes were wide and glassy, his lips pressed together so hard they had turned pale. He was 19 years old. He was somebody's son, and the federal government was choosing to let him be driven deeper into danger because the evidence mattered more than the extraction. Lockhart walked Cedric to the patrol car. He opened the rear door. He placed his hand on the top of Cedric's head and guided him into the back seat the way officers do, firmly, without gentleness. Osborne slid into the passenger side of the patrol car. Lockhart started the engine. The sedan remained on the shoulder. Nobody locked it. Nobody cared about it. The patrol car pulled onto the highway and turned east toward town. Cedric sat in the back seat with his hands cuffed behind him, the button camera still streaming the green light, still blinking, driving toward the station, driving toward the back room, and the DOJ let it happen. The Barton County Police Station sat at the end of a gravel road on the east side of town, a single-story brick building with narrow windows and a flagpole out front that leaned slightly to the left, as though it had been installed by someone who did not own a level. There was a main entrance facing the parking lot, and a side door that opened onto a patch of cracked concrete near the dumpsters. Lockhart did not use the main entrance. He drove the patrol car around the building to the side door parked with the headlights facing the tree line, and cut the engine. The transition from highway to station was less than 4 miles, but it felt like crossing into a different country. The road noise disappeared. The crickets were louder here, surrounded by brush and shadow. Lockhart opened the rear door and pulled Cedric out by the elbow. Osborne walked ahead and unlocked the side door with a key that was separate from the standard building key every officer carried. A different key for a different door. Cedric was walked down a hallway he had never seen. It did not look like the interior of a police station. There was no front desk, no bulletin board with safety posters, no vending machine humming in the corner. This hallway was bare. Overhead pipes ran along the ceiling. The floor was unpainted concrete. They passed a storage room stacked with cardboard boxes. They passed a mechanical room where a boiler clanked softly behind a metal door. Then they reached a room at the very end of the corridor. Osborne opened it with the same separate key. Inside was a windowless space, roughly 12 feet by 10 feet. A single table, 3 chairs, and a fluorescent light mounted to the ceiling that hummed and flickered in an irregular rhythm. There were no security cameras in the corners, no recording equipment on the walls, no phone on the table, no computer. Nothing that generated a record, nothing that proved this room was used for anything at all. This room had been designed to not exist. Cedric was placed in one of the chairs. His handcuffs were removed. Lockhart stood by the door. Osborne leaned against the wall. Nobody spoke. The fluorescent light buzzed. 20 minutes passed. Then the door opened and Chief Howard Kingsley walked in. He was tall, 6'1", with silver hair combed back from a broad forehead and a face that carried the composed expression of a man who had never been questioned in a room he controlled. He wore civilian clothes, a pressed button-down shirt, khaki trousers, polished loafers. No uniform, no badge, nothing that identified him as law enforcement. He entered without urgency, pulled back the chair across from Cedric, and sat down. He placed his hands flat on the table, fingers spread, and studied Cedric's face for a long moment before speaking. When he finally did speak, his voice was measured, almost warm, almost fatherly. He did not yell. He did not curse. He did not slam anything or raise his fist. He talked. He explained. He told Cedric that there was a way things worked in Barton County that was different from what Cedric might have learned in his college textbooks. He said the county had its own system, its own order. He called it community insurance. He said black residents of Barton County participated in this system voluntarily, and in exchange for their monthly contributions, they were left alone. Their children were not stopped on the highways. Their businesses were not subjected to random inspections. Their homes were not raided on anonymous tips. It was protection. It was stability. It was how peace was maintained. Kingsley's language was careful. He never used the word extortion. He never used the word payment. He said contribution. He said participation. He said cooperation. Every ugly thing he described was wrapped in the soft language of mutual benefit, as though he were explaining the terms of a neighborhood association rather than a criminal shakedown operation. He told Cedric that his family now owed $5,000 for the evening's incident. This was the resolution fee. In addition, there would be a monthly contribution of $500 going forward. He called it standard. He said most families found it manageable. He offered Cedric a bottle of water from a small cooler beneath the table, extending it with the casual generosity of a man hosting a guest, and Cedric took it because his throat was so dry he could not swallow. The room was cold. The fluorescent light buzzed and popped. Cedric sat with the water bottle in his hands, unopened, staring at the man across the table who was describing the systematic robbery of an entire community, with the same tone a banker might use to explain a savings plan. Then Kingsley revealed what shifted the temperature of the room entirely. He began referencing things he should not have known. He said he was sorry to hear about Cedric's grandmother, that she had passed in March, and that it must have been difficult for the family. He mentioned the $15,000 life insurance payout by its exact amount. He knew Cedric was a sophomore at Tougaloo College. He knew Cedric's major was pre-law. He knew about the partial scholarship Cedric had received. He knew that Lorraine Darden worked double shifts at a nursing home in Yazoo City, and he named the facility. Every detail was precise, specific, researched. This was not information an officer picks up during a traffic stop. This was intelligence, surveillance, informants. Kingsley leaned forward slightly. His voice dropped half a register. He told Cedric that it would be a shame if a felony drug charge appeared on his academic record. He said colleges took that sort of thing seriously. He said financial aid offices had protocols for students facing criminal proceedings, and those protocols almost always resulted in the immediate suspension of scholarship funds. He said Cedric had a promising future, and it would be a tragedy to see it disrupted by something that could so easily be avoided. The threat was total. It was not a fist. It was not a gun. It was the complete architecture of a young man's future held hostage by a smiling man in a windowless room. And the level of personal detail was chilling because it revealed a network that extended far beyond the police department. Someone at the college had provided information. Someone in local government had access to insurance records. Someone at the nursing home knew Lorraine's schedule. This was not a police department with a corruption problem. This was a criminal enterprise embedded in the fabric of an entire county, with tendrils reaching into schools, banks, courthouses, and workplaces. In Washington, the DOJ team watched the stream with a silence that had moved past shock into something colder. They were no longer investigating a corrupt police department. They were uncovering something that had been growing in the dark for a very long time, feeding on the people who had the least power to resist it. While the stream from Cedric's button camera continued to transmit from inside the back room, DOJ agent Raymond Kearney pivoted the investigation in real time. He stood at his terminal in Washington and began issuing directives to a team of federal analysts who had been working the Barton County case for over a year. The conversation between Kingsley and Cedric had changed the scale of everything. What started as a civil rights investigation into traffic stop profiling had become something with financial dimensions that required a different kind of evidence. Kearney ordered his team to run rapid database searches across every public and sealed record they could access: property filings, bank accounts, tax records, departmental budget reports, court filings. The results came back within the hour, and they came back ugly. Barton County had processed over 200 civil asset forfeiture cases in the past 3 years. That number alone would have been unremarkable in a larger jurisdiction, but Barton County had a total population of 11,000 people, and the demographics of the forfeiture cases were staggering. 94% of the individuals whose property or cash had been seized were black. 94%. In a county where the black population was 41%. The math was not ambiguous. The total amount seized exceeded $1.2 million. Bank records obtained through emergency federal subpoenas showed irregular deposits into personal accounts linked to Kingsley Lockhart and 3 other officers whose names had appeared repeatedly in Langford's complaint files. But the money did not stop with the police department. Deposits also flowed to an account associated with a county judge named Ormond, and a separate account tied to a county supervisor who had served in his position for 14 years. The case was now a potential RICO prosecution, the kind of federal racketeering charge reserved for organized criminal enterprises. Kearney presented the financial data to Hewitt. She told him to keep building. Meanwhile, in Barton County, the part of the story that the cameras and databases could not capture was unfolding in a rusted Buick sedan, driving 10 miles over the speed limit toward the police station. Lorraine Darden gripped the steering wheel with both hands and drove with her jaw clenched so tight her back teeth ached. On the passenger seat beside her was a white envelope. Inside the envelope was $3,000. 1,400 of it had come from the savings account Lorraine had opened for Cedric's textbooks and campus fees. It was money she had set aside $20 and $30 at a time over the course of a year, small deposits made after double shifts at the nursing home. Money that represented hundreds of hours of lifting and bathing and feeding elderly patients who sometimes did not remember her name. Another $800 came from her neighbor Doris, who lived 2 doors down, and who handed the bills to Lorraine without asking a single question, because she had lived in Barton County long enough to understand what a mother gathering cash in the evening meant. The remaining $800 Lorraine had pulled from the envelope she kept taped under the kitchen sink, the emergency fund, the money that was never supposed to be touched unless someone was dying. Lorraine walked into the station through the front entrance. She wore her nursing home scrubs. She had not changed. She had not eaten. Her eyes were swollen, but dry. She had already done her crying on the drive and was now operating in the space beyond tears, where the body simply functions because it must. She told the front desk officer that she was there for her son. The officer picked up a phone, spoke quietly, and then told Lorraine to follow him. She was escorted down a hallway through a door and into the back room. Kingsley was still seated at the table. Cedric sat across from him, his water bottle untouched, his face expressionless in the way that young men's faces become expressionless when they are trying very hard not to show fear. Kingsley stood when Lorraine entered. He greeted her warmly as though she were visiting a neighbor. He called her by her first name. He pulled out a chair for her. He asked how she was doing, how the drive had been, whether she needed anything. The performance was meticulous. He was playing the role of a reasonable man in an unreasonable situation, a man who was simply trying to help a family navigate a difficult moment. Lorraine handed him the envelope. Kingsley opened it at this table. He removed the bills and counted them slowly, deliberately stacking them by denomination. $3,000 exactly. He nodded. He told Lorraine the remaining $2,000 was due by Friday. He reminded her about the monthly contribution schedule. He said $500 on the first of every month. He said most families found a rhythm with it after the first few months. He said it got easier. Lorraine nodded. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She did not cry. She sat with her hands folded in her lap, and her spine straight and her chin level, and she nodded because she had the posture of a woman who had seen this before, not to herself, but to others. She had watched other families in the community go through this exact process, watched them shrink, watched them adjust, watched them absorb the cost of existing in Barton County while pretending it was normal. She had always known it could happen to her family. She had prayed it would not. Now it had, and resistance was not an option she could see from where she was sitting. Kingsley shook Lorraine's hand. He shook Cedric's hand. He told them both to drive safely. Lockhart escorted them out through the side hallway toward the exit. The hallway was narrow and dim. As they walked, a door opened from the opposite direction, and 2 officers brought another person through. A black man in his mid-50s. His face was swollen along the left cheekbone. His lower lip was split and bleeding. His shirt was torn at the collar, exposing a patch of bare skin above his shoulder. He walked with the shuffling gait of someone who had been struck recently and was bracing for the possibility of being struck again. Cedric recognized him immediately. Franklin Hendry, 55 years old. Cedric's former high school history teacher. The man who had written his college recommendation letter. The man who had stood at the front of a classroom and taught Cedric about the Montgomery bus boycott, about the March on Washington, about the courage it took to stand against injustice when the entire weight of a system was designed to keep you down. Hendry was being brought into the back room. He was the next one. Their eyes met in the hallway. It lasted less than 2 seconds. But in that fragment of time, Cedric saw something in Hendry's eyes that he had never seen before. Defeat, complete and total. The light that had animated those eyes in a classroom, the fire that had burned behind every lecture about Frederick Douglass and Fannie Lou Hamer, and every lesson about the price of freedom, was gone. Hendry looked at Cedric and mouthed 2 words without making a sound. "Don't fight." 2 words from the man who had taught Cedric everything he believed about fighting. Cedric walked out of that station into the night air and stood in the gravel parking lot and understood for the first time the true scale of what was happening. This was not a handful of incidents. This was not a few bad officers. The entire black community of Barton County had been living under occupation. Decades of fear, decades of silence, decades of stolen money. And until this moment, nobody outside the county had known or cared. But the camera on his collar had seen it all. It had seen the room. It had seen the cash counted on the table. It had seen the face of a beaten schoolteacher being dragged through a hallway toward a room that was not supposed to exist. And 600 miles away, every second of it had been watched, recorded, and preserved. Cedric sat on the edge of the bathtub in his mother's house, with the door locked and the exhaust fan running. His hands would not stop shaking. He held them out in front of him and watched his fingers tremble and could not make them stop no matter how hard he pressed his palms together. The button camera was off now. He had deactivated it in the car on the drive home following Kearney's instructions and placed it inside a small tin box that Kearney had provided to block any signal. But even with the camera dark and the tin sealed, Cedric could still feel it against his chest, like a second heartbeat. He pulled out the burner phone Kearney had given him and dialed Theodore Langford's personal number. Langford answered on the second ring. His voice was steady, careful, the voice of a man who had trained himself over 40 years of legal work to remain calm when others could not. Cedric spoke fast. He described the back room. He described the fluorescent light and the bare concrete floor and the 3 chairs and the table where Kingsley sat and counted his mother's money. He described Kingsley's speech about community insurance. He described the monthly payment demand. He described every word Kingsley had used and the tone in which he had used them, the measured courtesy, the soft-spoken threats, the way Kingsley offered water, while explaining how he intended to financially bleed a family for the foreseeable future. And then Cedric described Franklin Hendry. His voice broke on Hendry's name. He told Langford about the swollen face and the split lip and the torn shirt. He told him about the 2 words Hendry had mouthed in the hallway. "Don't fight." The teacher who had spent his life teaching students to fight was telling them to surrender. Langford listened without interrupting. When Cedric finished, Langford exhaled slowly and said something Cedric did not expect. He said this was worse than anything his 47 complaints had suggested. He said the complaints were the surface. The back room was the foundation. And the system Kingsley described, the monthly payments, the informant network, the integration with the college and local government offices, represented something that had been growing for years, possibly decades, without any outside accountability. Langford conference called Kearney on a secure line. Kearney confirmed that the DOJ had the full stream. Every minute from the moment Cedric was pulled over to the moment he walked out of the station was recorded in high definition with synchronized audio. The evidence was devastating, but Hewitt wanted more. The video documented extortion and brutality. It captured Kingsley's voice, his language, his demeanor, his system of control. But to build RICO charges that would survive a federal courtroom and withstand the inevitable challenges from defense attorneys who would argue isolated incidents, and rogue actors the DOJ needed Kingsley himself, discussing the financial architecture. They needed him explaining where the money went, how it was divided, who else received their share. The video from tonight was the skeleton of the case. The financial conversation would be the blood. Kearney asked Cedric a question he had no right to ask, but asked anyway. He asked if Cedric was willing to go back. Lorraine's $2,000 balance was due by Friday, in 4 days. She was scheduled to deliver it in person to the station. Kearney wanted Cedric to accompany her, wearing the camera again. This time not merely documenting the process, but actively trying to get Kingsley talking about where the money pipeline led, who got paid, how the funds were distributed, what happened to the $1.2 million that had been extracted from black residents over 3 years. Cedric closed his eyes. The bathroom fan rattled above him. He could hear his mother in the kitchen washing dishes with the kind of mechanical energy that meant she was trying not to think. He said yes. He told Kearney he would go back. Lorraine found out 30 minutes later. Cedric told her in the kitchen, standing by the sink where the emergency envelope now sat empty. Her reaction was immediate and volcanic. She did not scream. Screaming would have been easier to absorb. She wept, deep, shuddering sobs that bent her forward at the waist and forced her to grip the counter to stay standing. She told Cedric he could not go back into that building. She said she had already lost her mother to the stress of living in this county. Her mother's heart had given out, carrying the weight of decades of fear and silence and compliance, and Lorraine knew it. She had always known it. Even when the doctors called it hypertension and high cholesterol and the accumulated effects of aging, Lorraine knew what had really killed her mother. Barton County had killed her. Slowly, year by year, payment by payment. And now Lorraine was watching the same county reach for her son, and she could not bear it. She told Cedric she would deliver the money herself, alone. He did not need to be there. He did not need to risk himself again. Cedric looked at his mother. He loved her with a ferocity that sat in his chest like a physical thing, heavy and hot and permanent. But he told her something that came from the part of himself that Franklin Hendry had built in a high school classroom, the part that had survived the back room. He told her that if he did not do this, Franklin Hendry's grandchildren would grow up paying the same tax. He told her that the back room would still be there next year, and the year after that, and the year after that, and some other 19-year-old would be sitting in that chair being offered water by a man who was stealing his future. The argument was brutal. It lasted over an hour. Lorraine alternated between fury and grief and desperate bargaining, offering to move to sell the house to transfer Cedric to a college in another state, anything to avoid sending her son back into that building. Cedric held his ground. Lorraine finally agreed. She made him promise that this was the last time. One more visit, one more recording, and then they were done with Barton County forever. Cedric promised. Later that night, lying in his childhood bedroom staring at the ceiling, Cedric noticed something on his phone. Not the burner phone Kearney had given him, his personal phone. The one he had been carrying when he was stopped on the highway. The one that had been in his pocket during the backroom meeting. Apps were opening on their own. The screen brightened and dimmed without being touched. The battery, which had been at 70% when he arrived home, was down to 19%. Cedric called Kearney on the burner phone immediately. Kearney's voice changed when he heard the description. He contacted his technical team and had them examine Cedric's personal phone remotely through a diagnostic link. The confirmation came within the hour. The phone had been cloned. While Cedric was in the back room, someone at the station had used a cell site simulator, a device that mimics a cell tower and intercepts phone data to copy the contents of his personal phone. They had his call history, his contacts, his text messages, his email, every app, every login, every saved password. And if they examined the call history carefully, they would find a number Cedric had called 2 months ago when Langford first connected him to the DOJ, before Cedric had been given the burner, before he knew to be careful. It was a brief call, less than 3 minutes, but the number was a DOJ Civil Rights Division line. If Kingsley's people traced that number, they would know exactly what Cedric was doing. They would know about the camera, they would know about the investigation, and Cedric would be in danger that went beyond extortion and into territory that Kearney did not want to describe out loud. Kearney told Cedric to destroy his personal phone. He provided a clean burner and new protocols. He told Cedric that the Friday timeline was now non-negotiable. They could not afford to wait any longer. Every day they delayed was a day Kingsley's people might connect the dots. But Cedric would walk back into that station knowing that the people inside might already suspect he was working against them. The bathroom fan continued to rattle. Somewhere in the house, Lorraine was still awake. Cedric could hear her moving through rooms she had lived in for 20 years, rooms that had never felt safe, and now felt even less so. He pressed the burner phone against his forehead and breathed. Friday morning arrived with the kind of stillness that felt wrong. No wind, no bird song. The sky was a flat gray sheet, pulled tight from horizon to horizon, and the air sat heavy and motionless, as though the atmosphere itself was holding its breath. Cedric and Lorraine left the house at 9:30. Lorraine drove. Cedric sat in the passenger seat wearing a fresh button camera pinned to his collar, a new unit that Kearney had delivered through Langford the previous night. The camera was active. The green light pulsed against the fabric. In Washington, the DOJ stream was live. Hewitt and her team watched the feed on a bank of monitors in a room that had been designated a command center for the operation. But the scale of the operation had changed since the first traffic stop. This was no longer a surveillance exercise. This was now a joint DOJ and FBI action. A federal rapid response team had been positioned at a staging area on the outskirts of Barton County, 22 minutes from the police station by road. Armored vehicles, tactical officers, communication equipment, medical personnel. The full weight of federal authority parked behind a tree line on a former sawmill property waiting for a signal. Kearney monitored from a mobile command post that he had driven down from Jackson overnight. He was parked at a gas station 3 miles from the police station, close enough to coordinate, and far enough to avoid detection. Every piece was in place. The only variable was what would happen inside the building. Lorraine parked in front of the station. She carried a plain brown envelope with $2,000 inside. She had borrowed the money from the church emergency fund, a decision that required her to tell the pastor what was happening, which meant one more person knew, which meant one more crack in the secrecy that Kingsley relied upon. They entered through the front door. The lobby was small and brightly lit with plastic chairs along one wall and a front desk behind a pane of glass. The officer behind the desk looked up when they walked in. He was young, mid-20s, with a thin mustache and a name tag Cedric did not recognize. His eyes moved from Lorraine to Cedric and stayed on Cedric for 2 seconds too long. Not a glance. A study. Then he picked up a phone, spoke quietly into the receiver, and told them to wait. Cedric's skin prickled. Something was different. The last time he was here, the front desk officer had been indifferent. Processing. Today, there was attention. The hallway leading toward the back of the building was quieter than it should have been for a Friday morning in a functioning police station. No officers passing through. No phones ringing. No radio chatter. The building felt staged, held. Lorraine sat in one of the plastic chairs. Cedric stood near the water fountain and tried to breathe normally. After 10 minutes, Lockhart appeared from the back hallway and led them through the same corridor as before, past the storage room, past the boiler, into the room at the end. Kingsley was already seated at the table, but the warmth from the previous visit was gone. Entirely. His hands were not spread open on the table in that expansive gesture of false hospitality. They were clasped together in front of him, thumbs pressing against each other, and his eyes did not smile when Lorraine and Cedric entered. He was cold, still, assessing. He watched them sit down. He did not offer water. He did not greet Lorraine by name. He looked at Cedric the way a mechanic looks at an engine that is making a sound it should not be making. Lorraine placed the brown envelope on the table. Kingsley did not touch it. He did not count the money. He let the envelope sit there untouched, which was itself a message because money was always the first thing he reached for. Instead, he reached below the table and produced a single sheet of paper. He slid it across the surface toward Cedric. Cedric looked down. It was a printed call log. Dates, times, phone numbers, duration. It was from his personal phone. The cloned data. One number was highlighted with a circle drawn around it in blue ink. Cedric recognized it instantly. It was the DOJ Civil Rights Division contact line. The one he had called for 3 minutes in April before switching to the burner. Kingsley asked who the number belonged to. His voice was not loud. It was not aggressive. It was dangerously calm the way a blade is calm before it moves. Cedric told him it was a friend from college, a classmate, someone he had called about a study group. Kingsley's expression did not change. He asked again. Same words, same tone. Cedric repeated the lie. Kingsley stared at him. The silence lasted 6 full seconds. In a room with no windows and no clocks, 6 seconds was a geological age. Then Kingsley nodded once to Lockhart. Lockhart moved from the doorway toward Cedric. His approach was slow, deliberate, professional. He told Cedric to stand. Cedric stood. Lockhart began a thorough pat-down. Not the quick highway frisk from the first stop. This was methodical. His hands moved across Cedric's torso, checking every fold of fabric, pressing along the seams of his shirt, moving down his sides across his waistband through his pockets. Then his hands traveled upward, along Cedric's chest, over his shoulders, up to his collar. Lockhart's right hand paused. His fingertips touched something. A small raised disc against the fabric of Cedric's shirt collar. Smaller than a dime. Hard, not a button. His fingers lingered. Cedric stopped breathing. In Washington, the monitors showed the feed from the camera shaking slightly as Lockhart's hand disturbed the fabric. Lockhart pinched the disc between his thumb and forefinger. He pulled Cedric's collar open with his other hand and looked down. The camera stared up at him. For 3 full seconds, the DOJ surveillance screen in Washington was filled with an extreme close-up of Brett Lockhart's face, his eyes wide, his nostrils flaring, his mouth opening but producing no sound. 3 seconds of a corrupt officer staring directly into the eye of federal justice 600 miles away, and not knowing it was already too late. Then Lockhart ripped the camera from Cedric's shirt. The fabric tore. The screen in Washington went black. Audio cut to static, then silence. Hewitt stood from her chair. The room erupted around her. Kearney's voice came through the command channel, urgent, sharp, demanding status. There was no status. The connection was severed. Cedric Darden was now exposed, identified, trapped inside a room that did not officially exist, surrounded by men who had just discovered that their crimes had been broadcast to the federal government of the United States. And nobody outside the station could see what was happening to him. The moment Lockhart tore the camera from Cedric's collar, the back room transformed. The controlled atmosphere that Kingsley had maintained through 2 meetings dissolved in an instant. Kingsley rose from his chair with a speed that contradicted everything about his careful, measured public persona. He swept his arm across the table and sent the brown envelope, the call log printout, and Lorraine's $2,000 scattering across the concrete floor. Bills fanned out beneath the flickering fluorescent light. Kingsley grabbed Cedric by the front of his shirt, twisted the fabric, and slammed him backward against the cinder block wall. The back of Cedric's head struck the wall with a sound like a hand clapping concrete. Bright white static flooded his vision. He tasted copper. Blood pooled along the inside of his lower lip, where his teeth had cut the soft tissue on impact. Lockhart pinned Cedric's arms behind his back and held them there with both hands, while Kingsley leaned in so close that Cedric could smell the coffee on his breath and see the web of red capillaries in the whites of his eyes. Kingsley's voice had dropped to something that was not quite a whisper and not quite a growl. It occupied a register that Cedric had never heard from a human being, a register that contained zero performance and zero pretense. He told Cedric that he had made people disappear before. He said it the way a person describes a mundane task, without emphasis, without drama, as a statement of historical fact. He told Cedric that the swamp behind the county motor pool had kept secrets for 30 years. He said the catfish were always hungry. He said nobody ever comes looking in Barton County. Lorraine screamed. She had been sitting frozen in her chair from the moment Lockhart found the camera, her body locked in the paralysis of a nightmare that she could not wake from. But when Kingsley slammed her son against the wall, something broke through. She lunged forward. Osborne intercepted her. He wrapped his arms around her midsection and forced her back into the chair with enough pressure that the chair legs scraped across the concrete and left pale scratches on the floor. He held her there. Lorraine's screams turned into words. She said her son's name. She said it over and over and over as though repeating it could anchor him to the world, could prevent whatever was about to happen from happening through the sheer force of a mother saying the name she had chosen for her child 19 years ago. Kingsley released Cedric's shirt and stepped back. He pulled his phone from his pocket and began making calls. The first was to Judge Ormond. His voice was clipped, rapid, stripped of the courtly diction he used in public. He said, "We have a problem. Federal. Handle your end." The second call was to the county supervisor. Same message, same tone. The network was activating. The system of mutual protection that had operated in silence for decades was now shifting into emergency mode. Judges and officials and officers across the county were receiving the same instruction. Protect yourself. Destroy what can be destroyed. Deny what can be denied. The infrastructure that Cedric's camera had revealed was now trying to save itself. In Washington, Patricia Hewitt stood in front of a black monitor and stared at the frozen final frame. Brett Lockhart's face captured in the instant before the feed died. Wide eyes. Open mouth. Hewitt did not waste time on the image. She activated the emergency protocol. The FBI tactical unit staged at the former sawmill property received the go order. Armored vehicles started their engines. Agents checked their equipment. Kearney coordinated from his mobile command post at the gas station 3 miles from the station, relaying information to the tactical commander, providing building layout details, marking entry points identifying the backroom's position at the end of the corridor. But 22 minutes. The staging area was 22 minutes from the police station by road, and in a windowless room at the end of a dark hallway. 22 minutes was a lifetime. Inside the station, the front lobby remained quiet. The young desk officer sat behind his glass partition and acted as though nothing was happening. This was part of his role. The front of the station was theater. The back was reality, and the wall between them was maintained by silence and complicity. Lorraine sat in the back room with Osborne's hand on her shoulder. Cedric leaned against the wall where he had been thrown, touching the back of his head and looking at the blood on his fingers. Kingsley paced. Lockhart held the destroyed camera in his hand and turned it over, examining it, trying to determine how much it had transmitted, and for how long. He could not know. There was no way to determine from the device itself whether it had been recording locally or streaming live. But the fear in the room was palpable. These men had operated in secrecy for years, and the possibility that their secrecy had been breached by a teenager with a button on his collar was unraveling them from the inside. Then something happened that none of them had planned for. Not Kingsley, not Lockhart, not Kearney, not Hewitt. Something that no operation manual or tactical protocol or surveillance plan could have anticipated. Because the person who changed everything was not a federal agent or a trained operative. She was a 44-year-old home care aide in nursing scrubs who had been told to sit down and be quiet. But at a certain point, being told to sit down is no longer a command a person can obey. In the chaotic minutes after the camera was found, in the confusion of Kingsley's phone calls and Lockhart's examination of the device, and Osborne's attention being pulled toward the hallway door, Lorraine was briefly unwatched. She reached into the pocket of her scrubs and pulled out her personal phone. A phone nobody had searched because nobody searches the mother. She did not call 911 because she had already tried that. During the first visit, when she had heard muffled shouting from the back hallway, while sitting in the lobby, she had called 911 and been told by a Barton County dispatcher that officers were handling a situation and everything was fine. The system protected itself at every level. So Lorraine did not call the system. She opened a social media app, tapped the livestream button, and pointed the camera at herself. She spoke directly into the lens. Her voice cracked but did not break. She stated her name. She stated her son's name. She named Brett Lockhart. She named Dale Osborne. She named Howard Kingsley. She described the extortion. She described the back room. She described the threats. She described the shakedown from 5 days earlier, the planted drugs, the $2,000 demand that had become $5,000, and then a monthly payment plan. She held up the bank withdrawal receipt from First Southern Bank, showing $3,000 removed from the account she had built for her son's college expenses. She said she was inside the Barton County Police Station and that her son had been thrown against a wall and was bleeding. She said nobody was coming to help because the people who were supposed to help were the people doing this. The live stream went live at 11:14 in the morning. Within 3 minutes, 400 people were watching. Within 5 minutes, 1,800. Within 7 minutes, 4,000. A local television reporter in Jackson who monitored social media feeds for breaking stories picked up the stream and shared it. Then a reporter at a regional affiliate saw it. Then a national news desk in Atlanta flagged it. By the time 11 minutes had passed, Lorraine Darden's face was on screens across the country. Her voice raw and unpolished and full of the kind of truth that cannot be manufactured or scripted, was playing on phones and tablets and laptops in living rooms and offices and newsrooms from Mississippi to New York. The Barton County Police Station was now under siege from 2 directions simultaneously. From the east, armored FBI vehicles carrying federal agents with warrants and weapons racing toward the building at speed. And from every direction at once, the uncontrollable, unstoppable flood of a mother's testimony, reaching millions of people in real time through a 4-inch screen held in a shaking hand. Kingsley had built the back room for silence. He had built it without cameras, without records, without windows. He had spent decades ensuring that what happened in that room stayed in that room. But he had no protocol for this. He had no defense against a woman in nursing scrubs with a cell phone and nothing left to lose. Lorraine had turned the front room into a megaphone, and the whole country was listening. The first FBI vehicle arrived at the Barton County Police Station at 11:31 in the morning, 17 minutes after Lorraine began her live stream. A black armored truck turned off the county road and rolled across the gravel parking lot with the weight and inevitability of something that could not be stopped or negotiated with. 3 more vehicles followed within 90 seconds. Federal agents in tactical gear exited and moved toward every entrance simultaneously. The front door, the side door, the fire exit at the rear. The young officer at the front desk stood up when the first agents entered the lobby and raised both hands without being told to, because the look on the lead agent's face made it very clear that this was not a moment for questions or resistance. Kearney entered through the side door with his badge held high and his voice even higher, calling out federal identification and instructing every person in the building to stand still and show their hands. The backroom door was breached without a key. 2 agents pushed it open and found Lockhart standing against the far wall with the destroyed camera still in his hand. Osborne was near the door. Kingsley stood in the center of the room with his phone pressed against his ear mid-sentence in what would be his final call as a free man. All 3 were ordered to the floor. All 3 complied. Handcuffs closed around wrists that had spent years closing handcuffs around others. Cedric was found leaning against the cinder block wall with a bruise forming along the left side of his jaw and a swelling knot on the back of his head. He was standing. He was conscious. He was breathing. A federal medic examined him on the spot and confirmed no fractures, no concussion, no injuries requiring immediate hospitalization. Lorraine was still in her chair. Her phone was still in her hand. The live stream was still running. When the agents entered the room, the camera on her phone captured it all. Armed federal officers flooding a windowless room. 3 men in handcuffs being walked out. Her son alive, touching the back of his head, looking at her with eyes that held something she had not seen in them since this began. Relief. The livestream audience by that point had exceeded 40,000 viewers. The footage from Cedric's button camera combined with Lorraine's raw and unscripted social media broadcast created a national firestorm that moved faster than any press release or official statement could manage. Within 24 hours, the story was leading every major news broadcast in the country. Within 72 hours, the full scope of the DOJ investigation was unsealed by a federal judge in Jackson, who determined that public interest in the case outweighed the standard timeline for disclosure. The numbers were staggering when they entered the public record. 14 officers of the Barton County Police Department were indicted on federal civil rights violations and racketeering charges under the RICO statute. Brett Lockhart was charged with extortion evidence tampering assault under color of law and conspiracy. Dale Osborne was charged as an accessory and co-conspirator. Howard Kingsley faced the heaviest charges: racketeering, extortion, conspiracy, obstruction of justice, civil rights violations, and multiple counts of theft under color of law. Judge Ormond was removed from the bench by the State Judicial Commission and indicted on charges of conspiracy and bribery. The county supervisor resigned within 48 hours of the arrests and was subsequently charged with misuse of public funds and conspiracy. The Barton County Police Department was dissolved by federal court order. Not reformed, not restructured. Dissolved. A state-monitored interim law enforcement force was installed under a federal consent decree that would govern policing in the county for the next 10 years, requiring independent oversight body cameras on every officer's civilian review of all use-of-force incidents, and mandatory racial bias training. The $1.2 million seized through fraudulent civil asset forfeiture proceedings was ordered returned to the families from whom it had been taken. A restitution fund was established. Langford's office processed the claims. Dozens of families across the county came forward with their own stories once the arrests were made, and the back room was no longer something people whispered about but denied. They came forward with receipts and bruises and memories they had carried for years. Fathers who had been stopped and stripped of their cash on the way home from work. Mothers who had been told their children would go to prison unless they paid. Grandparents who had watched their savings disappear into envelopes handed across a table in a room at the end of a dark hallway. Franklin Hendry testified before a federal grand jury. He sat in a witness chair in a federal courtroom in Jackson and spoke for 3 hours. He described the beatings. He described the payments. He described the night he was brought to the back room and told that his pension would be garnished through fabricated tax liens if he did not cooperate. He described 20 years of silence. And when the prosecutor asked him why he had never reported it, Hendry looked at the jury and said, "Report it to whom?" His voice did not shake. Cedric's face appeared on every news broadcast for weeks. He did not give interviews at first. Langford handled the media, issuing statements, managing requests, protecting Cedric's privacy as much as possible, while the legal process moved forward. When Cedric finally did speak publicly, it was at a community gathering at Mount Olive Baptist Church, the same church where Jerome's mother had first told her story. Cedric stood at the front of the fellowship hall, in a suit his mother had bought him that morning, and said that the camera did not make him brave. He said the camera was a piece of technology. Bravery was his cousin Jerome, filing a complaint he knew would be ignored. Bravery was Gladys carrying a phone number in her Bible for 2 years. Bravery was his mother walking into that station with an envelope full of money that represented everything she had. Lorraine's live stream video was viewed over 20 million times in the weeks following the arrests. She became an accidental symbol of defiance, a mother who had done the only thing left to do when every official channel had failed. She did not seek the attention. She did not hire a publicist. She did not write a book. She went back to work at the nursing home the following Monday, because the patients still needed their baths and their medications and someone to call them by name. But the story was not finished. During the federal sweep of the police station, agents had conducted a room-by-room search of the entire building, cataloging evidence for the prosecution. In Kingsley's private office behind his desk, beneath a framed photograph of himself shaking hands with a former governor, agents found a locked filing cabinet. The key was not on Kingsley's key ring. It was taped to the underside of his desk drawer, hidden with the care of a man who knew what the cabinet contained. Inside were records dating back 3 decades, handwritten ledgers documenting payments received from residents whose names were organized alphabetically, Polaroid photographs of individuals taken during traffic stops, their faces frozen in expressions of fear and confusion, dated on the back in pencil. Case files that had never been entered into any official system describing stops, confrontation seizures, and outcomes that the department's public records showed no trace of. Kearney brought the filing cabinet to an evidence processing facility in Jackson. It took his team 4 days to catalog the contents. On the 3rd day, a junior analyst pulled a file from near the back of the bottom drawer. It was thin, a single folder. The label on the tab was a date, October 17, 1997. Kearney opened it himself. Inside was a traffic stop report from a night 29 years earlier. The driver was listed as a 22-year-old black male named Curtis Darden, Cedric's father. The man Lorraine had told Cedric about only in the vaguest terms. The man she said had left when Cedric was a baby. The man whose name was never spoken in the house, whose photographs did not hang on any wall, whose absence was explained with a silence so total that Cedric had learned by the age of 6 not to ask. The report described a stop on the same 2-lane highway where Cedric had been pulled over. The same stretch of cracked Mississippi blacktop. The arresting officer's name was Hank Crockett, who Kearney's research later confirmed was the former chief of police and Kingsley's predecessor, the man who had hired Kingsley and trained him and built the back room that Kingsley inherited and expanded. The notes in the file were written in Crockett's handwriting, confirmed by forensic analysis. They described a stop that escalated. A young man who refused to pay. A confrontation that moved off the highway and into the darkness beyond the shoulder. And at the bottom of the final page, a single line, written in blue ink, addressed to a young officer named Howard Kingsley, handled. No further action required. Curtis Darden never left his family. He was stopped on the same highway by the same department under the same system that his son would encounter 29 years later. He never made it home. For 29 years, Lorraine Darden believed she had been abandoned. She had raised Cedric alone, working double shifts, building a life from nothing, telling her son that his father had chosen to leave because the alternative was a possibility too monstrous to consider without proof. She could not tell her child that his father might have been killed by the police because she did not know. She only knew he was gone. She only knew that in Barton County people disappeared and nobody explained why. Now there was proof. Kearney delivered the file to Lorraine personally. He drove to her house on a Tuesday evening and sat at her kitchen table and placed the folder in front of her and told her what it contained before she opened it. Lorraine did not open it for 3 days. When she finally did, she was alone in her kitchen at 4 in the morning, and the sound she made was not a sound Cedric heard because he was asleep in the next room. But it was a sound that the walls of that house absorbed and held the way old houses hold everything that has ever happened inside them. Weeks later, on a Saturday morning in early autumn, Cedric stood on the shoulder of the 2-lane highway, where he had been pulled over. The air was cooler now. The leaves were beginning to turn. A work crew was installing a memorial marker at the edge of the road. Not for Cedric, for Curtis Darden. And for every black resident of Barton County who had been stopped, robbed, beaten, silenced, or erased on this road across 3 decades. The marker was modest. A stone, a name, a date. The words, remembered, reclaimed, restored. Cedric touched the spot on his collar where the button camera used to be. The small green light that had seen everything. He felt the absence of it against his skin like a scar that was still healing. The road stretched ahead, 2 lanes of cracked blacktop running through the pine flats of rural Mississippi. The same road his father had driven 29 years ago. The same road his grandmother had avoided, the same road Jerome had bled on. But it was different now. The patrol car that used to sit behind the billboard at mile marker 9 was gone. The officers who used to wait there for older sedans with black drivers were in federal custody. The back room at the end of the hallway had been sealed, photographed, and would never be used again. The road was open, and for the first time in 30 years, it was safe. This story is over, but the conversation it represents is not. Every day in counties and cities across this country, systems like the one in Barton County operate in silence because the people they hurt do not have a camera, do not have a Langford, do not have a Kearney. The question that matters is not whether these systems exist. They do. The question is, what happens when ordinary people decide they will no longer be silent? So here is what this story asks of you. Think about the place where you live. Think about the systems you see and the ones you do not see. Think about who is protected and who is paying. And then leave a comment below. Tell us what justice looks like in your community. Tell us what still needs to change. If this story moved, you hit the like button so more people can find it. Subscribe to this channel so you never miss a story that matters. And share this video with someone who needs to hear it, because stories like Cedric's only reach the people who need them when someone passes them along. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring about the things that happen on roads most people never drive. May you carry this story with you, and may it remind you that the smallest light, even one, no bigger than a pencil eraser, can expose the deepest darkness.